So yes, I'm gonna go now. Start from here.
Okay.
So I'm gonna be talking to you folks about how to improve performance through better micro learning. I know Boss shared some ways of how at Johnson micro learning is being used. Kate talked to us about writing it well, structuring it well, thinking about the capacity and all really good stuff. I have taken on a little bit challenging task for myself as well, and I want to talk to you about this notion of performance, right? But before we understand anything in this context, I feel I need to really briefly tell you about how our memory system actually works. So it's going to be a bit theoretical, so please bear with me. I am an academic, so that is my excuse. But again, stay with me. I'll try to make it as simple and as easy to understand as possible. So our memory system actually has three levels, so which is our sensory memory, our working memory, and long-term memory. And this applies to all of the learning in cognitive science. Now, input, sort of what we see, what we hear, comes into our sensory memory. And if we do something with it, then it manages to enter our working memory. And if we don't do something with it, it goes into a black hole. And that happens quite often. So, for example, when I'm going to pick up my kids from school, my eyes see a lot of things, my ears hear a lot of stuff, but I don't necessarily think about it, pay attention to it, deeply process it. It goes away. But there are some things that matter to me, and then I process that. And within that working memory, which is a very, very tight bottleneck, something manages to pass and gets organized and starts getting integrated and goes into my long-term memory. Now, for those who do know me, I talk a lot about memory system, I talk about microlearning, I talk about cognitive science, and I've actually focused a lot on the working memory part because huge fan of cognitive load theory, huge fan of how learning happens. But today I actually am taking the opportunity to talk a little bit more about long-term memory. So again, this is as fast of a crash course that I can share with you, but I want to focus on the long-term memory so we can really understand what the matter that I really want to share with you all today. Okay, so what happens in our long-term memory? Well, our long-term memory already has a whole range of knowledge, right? We knowledge from our life experiences, our classes, our friends, our books that we read, our conversations that we have, and that becomes our knowledge, our background knowledge. It becomes prior knowledge in certain contexts. In the context of new knowledge, it's prior knowledge. Or if in a general context, you can also call it our pre-existing knowledge or our background knowledge. It is a very, very crucial thing to make sense of the world. You construct meaning based on what you know about the world. So this is very, very important. Now, long-term memory doesn't just remain with the knowledge that you already have, because we are constantly doing this. Remember, the input is coming in, and some of that does get passed on when you go to university, when you have a deep conversation, when you read a book, when you go to a party, or when you attend micro-learning conference, for example. So your working memory is working hard and let some of that information, trying to pass it on to long-term memory. So that's actually happening. So that is basically your new knowledge that we are working on right now. Now, what happens to this new knowledge? It doesn't just come in. It needs to do something to actually stay in our long-term memory, because it's very easy for this knowledge to get lost because our working memory is very limited in time and capacity, and because we do need our background knowledge, what we already know predicts what we are going to know and how we're going to learn, how deeply we're going to understand what's coming in, right? So this particular new knowledge with our background knowledge needs to get connected like that. So it needs to establish these connections with each other so it starts to make some sense to us, right? And this particular new knowledge, it's not just so simple that okay, it comes in and boo boo boo, we got the connection. There's a lot going on, and some of those important steps or processes that happen to our new knowledge are encoding, storing, and retrieving. So I'm going to briefly talk about that. So as the new knowledge comes into our long-term memory, if you see, this blue box was our original long-term memory box that I had created over here for us all. So now it's in that big blue box because it's quite unlimited, this long-term memory. First, it needs to get encoded, meaning it needs to get broken down and meaning needs to be constructed out of it. Without that, deep processing cannot take place. Semantic processing, breaking down meaning, has to happen. What really helps is that what we already know. So it becomes easier. So that's why prior knowledge, background knowledge is king in this context. King, queen, and all top levels of authority you can think of, right? Then it actually gets. So encoding and learning, these two things create this experience of learning for us. When something comes in, it gets encoded and stored, we say learning is happening. That really is what learning is. Paul Kirshner calls learning as change in our long-term memory, because this encoding and storage has actually changed our existing long-term memory. Now, what good is memory or information that has come in if we can't retrieve it? So it also does go through this process of recall, retrieval. So if I memorize times table as a kid, then I need to use them later on in my life as I'm doing some mathematical calculation. It's retrieval, right? And so sometimes this retrieval is easy and sometimes retrieval is hard. Why? Because this also happens quite a lot. Forgetting is a part of the learning process. Now, forgetting gets a very, very bad name because forgetting is not fun, right? We worked so hard to learn, we paid attention, we memorized it, but we forgot, and that can happen. But here's an interesting thing. With newer research, we used to, back in the day, believe that forgotten information was actually lost from the long-term memory, gone. But now we do know that this is not the case. In fact, it does not actually get lost, it just becomes inaccessible. And that's a really key understanding to, as we go into the sort of explanation of learning and performance. I'm going to get to that in a second. But to understand that forgotten information is not lost, it's just inaccessible. That's a mind-blowing idea. That's the idea that we received from the new theory of disuse. And just think about it for a moment. There was a phone number of your best friend who was in high school you remembered, but perhaps today you have forgotten that. But it's just forgotten. It's still somewhere. But something happens, some kind of trigger, maybe it will bring it back to you. That means it was not lost. It's just somewhere inaccessible. That's a powerful realization of forgetting. We can use that to our advantage. Okay, let's talk about how. So before we do that, I want to mention that this new theory of disuse. So this word disuse comes from when you don't use something, we believed that it was lost. But in the new theory of disuse, which is by Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork, we now believe that the information that is learned will remain in our memory forever. New learning of the material will increase in storage strength. On the other hand, when information is not used, it becomes inaccessible over time. So what that means is that our beautiful, unlimited, powerful long-term memory actually has two characteristics. Not only does it store information, it also has a special characteristic that it can help us retrieve information, right? But when we don't retrieve, then we lose that sort of strength of it. Again, the information doesn't get lost. It just becomes a little bit inaccessible, goes somewhere deeper. It's not like finding something that you wanted to wear, but because of the change of season, it's like down, down, down in the storage box, right? But knowing that it's not lost, knowing that we could do something about a retrieval strength of the long-term memory, we can relearn it. We could do something, and that can help us bring that back, right? So storage strength is how well the information is encoded, meaning is made, and it's connected those new information with the old information. And retrieval is how fast you can pull it out of your brain, right? So this is extremely important because what we can store, that becomes in a way our learning. What we can retrieve, what people see us retrieving, that becomes our performance. So performance in a way is our way of showing our learning, correct? So two definitions here. Learning, it refers to the lasting changes in behavior or knowledge that help you remember, apply what you have learned. This is what we all want: long-term, durable retention, right? This is the target of instruction. This is the target of learning, training, for example, too. Performance, on the other hand, is the act of showing what you've learned, and you could do it in a specific area. It is something that can be seen, and that's why we do lots of exams, lots of tests, oral examination. This is how we show our skills, right? Learning is really hard to see. It's really only seen through the lens of performance. So performance is a very, very powerful thing too. But what I want you to remember is that performance is really showing retrieval strength of our long-term memory. We don't know for how long we might be able to do that, right? And that takes me to this idea is that learning is not the same thing as performance, or I should say over here, one-time performance or an immediate performance. So you learned something, you did a great course on 7 taps and you could do it right away. That's good. But can you do it later on? That's the question. That's where we want to be able to do that actually. Right away, many can do it, but the delay is where the magic is at. So think about it like this. Learning is an indicator of how well the information is stored in our long-term memory. Performance, on the other hand, is an indicator of how well we can retrieve it, recall it back from it. Okay, so I want to highlight here one thing is that learning is not necessarily seen as superior over here. I'm not trying to say learning is better than performance. It's just performance is what we see that learning is happening right now. What's really important is that to be able to continue to perform, that phrase, to be able to continue to do that, that's the key word over here if you think about it. Your long term, so the more deeper you learn, the better you'll keep performing, and you'll be able to perform 2 days later, 2 weeks later, 2 years later, etc., depending on the skill, right? Now, what does this actually all this mean? Few things. First point, we don't challenge it. It's correct. Retrieval leads to better storage. So when you show something that you could do it, it kind of has helped you memorize it better, right? We know that. But I want you to practice caution that when somebody can do something one time or immediately after learning something, that does not equate to long-term learning. We don't know that happened or not, right? So because forgetting can happen. And at the same time, this point is that forgetting creates a new higher potential of learning. Remember, I said, don't view forgetting as an enemy. It's like, oh, no, that's actually an opportunity because forgetting does not mean lost. Forgetting just means inaccessible. Now we just have to do something to bring that memory back. In fact, research has shown us that because the forgotten knowledge was never lost, it was just harder to access it, or it just became a little bit inaccessible. And this is what the basis of what I want to talk to you about is also desirable difficulty. So if you remember, my title slide was, it said the secret ingredient to improving performance in micro learning. And I said the secret ingredient, desirable difficulty. So I want to talk to you about desirable difficulties over here for a second. Now, what we're really trying to do is trying to push the boundaries of our long-term memory through retrieval strength to further enhance its storage strength. So not just what is stored, but how fast and how often, how continuously we can retrieve that information. Because the more you do that, the deeper the processing, the deeper the learning happens, and that performance becomes your, and nobody can take it away from you. What's really fascinating about this idea is that what I'm really saying is that forgetting is an opportunity for us to learn better. That is a highly counterintuitive thought in learning. It's not you, not me. Everybody would view that way, but it is so important to understand that learning is counterintuitive, and that's really the basis of desirable difficulties. What feels harder, something good is happening. It's like going to the gym, right? When you are feeling like I want to just give up right now, and that's really when the muscle burn is happening and something good's happening. Okay, I want to remind you here a sentence from what Robert Bjork says to us. I won't read it. I'm just going to give folks a moment to read this long sentence. I've learned through cognitive theory that you don't read slides, just read it for yourself, and I'll explain it once you had a chance. And you can drop some emojis if you had a chance to read it. Thank you. I see the emojis. So what's really interesting is that we all naturally feel our intuition that forgetting is gone. But here's the thing. Research shows us that forgetting is that opportunity for us to actually take the learning to the next level. It's vital that we tap into the power of forgetting that can actually lead to long-term learning, and that long-term learning will eventually make your performance better, because that's what we all want, right? Better performance. And this is the secret ingredient, and I want to talk about that. These are our desirable difficulties. And this is a beautiful alliteration because it's desirable and it's difficulty. It's like the positive and the negative word together. And I think Bjork did just such a beautiful job picking this term. I'll briefly talk to you about what these desirable difficulties are. So it was a term coined in 1994 by Robert Bjork. These are conditions. Now, these are, some people would call it problems, some people would call it challenges. I really think these are learning conditions. These are conditions intentionally integrated into a learning process. So when you're designing micro learning, you can integrate them into the learning path that you have. What they do is that they tap into the potential offered by the act of forgetting, because forgotten information is not lost information, it's just inaccessible. If you can do something to manage, pull out that inaccessible information, you will remember it longer. The memory trace that it creates is so much stronger and deeper. So it's a powerful thing. Again, very counterintuitive, right? Now, desirable, it's called desirable because they enhance long-term retention and transfer of knowledge. And these are called difficulty because they pose challenges by slowing down the process of performance. I put a question out there and it makes it harder for the learner or participant to solve it, but they have the information, but it's that challenge, but it's desirable because it's going to make the target, which is long learning. My target of instruction or my training is that you can do this task better, right? And but it slows that process down. That slow and sluggish nature makes it the difficulty, as we call it. But again, it's a condition for learning. But because it's a difficulty and it makes things slower, it doesn't seem efficient in the moment, but it's in the long run very, very powerful. It is not a surprise that desirable difficulties are often ignored and unappreciated and perhaps even left out of the learning design process, because who wants to do that, right? And Kate had shared the article that I've recently written. I'll share a little bit of that towards the end of my presentation. And it's exactly what Kate said in her message, is that it's often missed, or it's something that we don't, as instructional designer, learning designer, want to consider. But the cost is really high, because we're really all trying to do the same thing, make learning better so we can enhance the performance. And the more we perform, the more we learn. It's kind of that really powerful, because one strength, retrieval strength, makes the storage better, right? Okay. So
I'm giving you your
again,
2-minute warning, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. So just really quickly, reminder that one-time or immediate performance does not equate to long-term learning. So what do? We integrate some level of challenge. And how do we do that? That's what we call, I think now we're a little bit more comfortable with desirable difficulty, so we can call it DDs. That's what I said. There are science research has given us some amazing, amazing information. There's 5 fantastic ways to integrate desirable difficulties. Space your learning. Don't give the learning process all at once. Tell the learner or your participant that, don't cram it, break it down, spacing your learning. I think 7 Taps is so beautifully organized to be able to do that. Retrieval. Give quizzes, low stakes quizzes. You can do that fantastic in micro learning environment. Interleaving. I show an image of salad. Mix it up. If you within the same topic, related topic, but change some questions up, change content up, it forces the brain, because it's a desirable difficulty, changes the condition of learning. Contextual interference, put in a different context. Case-based studies can really, really do that. Scenario-based questions can really do that. And eventually, maybe initially you're giving a lot of feedback, start giving a little bit less feedback so the learner, participant, your trainee can start to take more of an independent role. I can speak a long time about these things, but I want to be totally cautious of the time. So I've written an article about this for 7 Taps, so I will share the link at the end for it. So please feel free to read and reach out if you have any questions. Again, how do you do that in micro learning? I have a few thoughts here. Short learning modules, spread them out over days. Mix them up, don't do the same content, related but different content. Do not shy away from low stakes quizzes. People love them. They really do. Forums, polls, discussions. Everybody likes to see, let me see how much I know. That test yourself is a powerful retrieval tool in your hands, and it's a desirable difficulty. Case-based learning to change the context. And again, combine retrieval with review, meaning give a quiz before recap. See what your learners already remember. And here's a super important thing that I would like to leave you all with, and something that many were mentioning that, and I was watching all the other presentations. Why should the learner or trainee or whoever's going through the module care? Tell them this is how learning happens. Build your learners metacognitive awareness. Help your learners understand how they learn best. We don't get often told this is how you're going to have the most benefit. Just giving it would make it feel like, oh, here goes again another quiz. I hate it. No, but if you communicate that, you're all watching me, listening to this, that's really a powerful tool in your hand. The metacognitive awareness. People need to know how learning happens, and that's how you will build better learning content. Your learners will learn better, and our goals will be more sort of achieved, which is exactly why we're here. And that's it. I know it was really fast, but as I said, I have written an article, and here's the QR code for that article. You can take it from here. I'm sure Kate or someone can also share the link. Absolutely
Yeah.
follow or connect with me on LinkedIn. I do have a newsletter that I write about science of learning, latest educational research. Please subscribe to it. It's free, and we share some amazing educational research for everyone. So it's educators, learning designers, and all the good stuff. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome.